The second reading is going to be from my father's perspective. This is going to be from chapter 5. And this was at a time when my father had completed his advanced high school education, what we call A-level education. And he returned to a city in Nigeria called Port Harcourt to try to move his life forward, to try to find a job. And the country was still going through a civil war, and so it was a really complicated time. Dilapidated, the storied residential buildings that had looked so fresh and new now appeared to Matthew as blackened shells of their former selves. It had been 3 months since Port Harcourt had been liberated, and yet soldiers still roamed the streets. Its electric grid destroyed, the city's hum fell quiet, exacerbated by sagging, abandoned homes, and deserted neighborhoods. Many of the people of Port Harcourt had fled the city, seeking refuge in the villages of their ancestors, whatever modest possessions they could carry perched on their heads. The city wasn't exactly in ruins, but it looked very different from the last time he'd visited. Still, Port Harcourt radiated hope. People had begun slowly filtering back to their homes. They scrubbed the soot from the walls and replaced shattered panes of glass, exclaiming with tearful joy at the return of neighbors and friends. Once a relentless monster, the miserable howl of war had been reduced to a specter. Although it still loomed, soldiers in army fatigues with guns propped on their shoulders and camouflage trucks patrolled periodically. Almost as in defiance, the city had begun to straighten its spine and throw its shoulders back in vain attempts to reduce the military presence to a simple nuisance. It was difficult to trust it. So much hope set against so much blight, and Matthew feared he was just projecting his own optimism onto the city. Like Port Harcourt, like so much of Nigeria, he'd seen his carefully laid plans dashed to the ground, hollowed out by the rhythmic flurry of news headlines and bullet spray. In the face of disappointment, he'd gathered his strength and set one foot in front of the other. Whether or not he was imagining it, the city's confident footfalls in lockstep with his own bolstered him. He'd learned to feel at home with his people. From him, this was larger than just the Ijaw. In a way, he'd always felt this, proudly claiming 3 different villages. Under the historical Ijaw matrilineal culture, he was Ogbian. But his paternal grandmother claimed Nembe, and his grandfather Tombia. Matthew had always claimed all 3. And now he lived in Port Harcourt. He recognized his kindred spirit as the city reached out to him, her embrace feminine like the Ijaw god. In stark contrast to the strong-armed push and pull of war, Matthew felt a tenderness in the city. Amid its sharp corners and dense surfaces, the city was in her heart a nurturing presence. She guided him back here, and now she guided him to Inekio.